So it feels like there is renewed optimism about the chances of some kind of Brexit deal being agreed. Now, I know these are only reports at this stage, but from what you've heard, is it something that you think Labour could support?
Not that I've heard so far, although, as you say, it is unsubstantiated reports. I think the problem areas are of regulation and deregulation, which come from whatever trade arrangement there is with Europe and the wider world, but also perhaps very seriously is the Irish border issue. And if it creates a border down the Irish Sea rather than on the Irish border itself, I can see that being problems.
And with that in mind, how would you treat any Labour MP that did decide to back this deal if it does come back to the House of Commons?
Well, I'll talk to them about it, but at the moment we're actually dealing with hypotheticals. So I'm not even sure the Prime Minister knows what the deal is going to be as yet. And so we'll obviously have a discussion about it within the Parliamentary Labour Party and with colleagues and decide how we go from here. But our principles are around the 5 pillars that I put forward in my letter to Theresa May some months ago, and what we stuck to, which is of a customs union with the European Union, a trade arrangement and protection of consumer, environmental and working rights, and crucially the support for the Irish peace process, which, remember, the Good Friday Agreement is not a bilateral agreement, it's an international agreement, it's a treaty.
At the same time, though, this is the defining political issue at the moment. You will have a position on whether or not to back any deal that comes. If a Labour MP goes against your agreed line, could they have the whip withdrawn?
We will decide what our voting process is when we know what the deal is. I can't really answer a question on whether we support a deal or not, which we haven't yet seen, and I don't think any Labour MP is yet able to answer that question either.
Would you be more likely to back any deal if it was put to a confirmatory referendum?
I think many in Parliament, not necessarily Labour MPs, but others might be more inclined to support it, even if they don't really agree with the deal. But I would caution them on this, because my view would be that I would want a deal that resembles the 5 pillars that we put forward, and that obviously would command support, and obviously does have wide support within the Labour Party and the trade unions.
But don't you need to compromise a bit? I mean, if it was put to a referendum, you could argue in that referendum that it was a bad deal.
I want us to protect those workers' rights, consumer and environmental rights. I want us to have that trade relationship with Europe. Look, in the week when Nissan says there's a question mark over Sunderland because of the possibility of a no-deal exit from the European Union, and we're already seeing job losses across the country, and we're seeing siren calls from businesses and unions all over the country about job losses, I think we've got to be very, very cautious.
So again, I know we are in hypothetical still, but if a deal does come back next week or towards the end of next week, what should come first? A second referendum or a general election?
We have to get a deal that we can agree on if possible, and the Labour position is that we would take this to a public vote under a Labour government, which within 3 months we would hope to reach agreement with the European Union. We believe that to be possible along the lines that we've set out, and within 6 months hold a referendum, and a Labour government would then implement the results of that referendum between a sensible relationship with Europe and Remain.
So just to be clear, it sounds like you're going for an election first and then a referendum.
We'll look at any deal that comes up before we trigger an election.
And when should an election be?
Well, it obviously depends what happens this week, but we have a government that is now in -40, hasn't yet won a vote in Parliament, and having the Queen's speech and the state opening of Parliament tomorrow is ludicrous, utterly ludicrous. What we've got, in effect, is a party political broadcast from the steps of the throne.
So do you think there should be an election before Christmas? Is that the kind of time frame you're looking at?
That is obviously a strong possibility, but listen, we're ready for an election at any time, because I want to go out there. I want to go out there and campaign on health, on housing, on ending universal credit, on investment for the future, on the green industrial revolution, all the things that our party has very strong and very exciting policies on.
But it's in your hands. Surely you want it as soon as possible.
No, it's not in my hands.
Before Christmas.
We're not a majority in Parliament. I wish we were, but we're not.
But if the government wants an election and you back an election, then you'll get an election.
If over 430 MPs vote for an election, there is an election. It's the Fixed Term Parliament Act. It is not an either or. It is an aggregation of those that vote for it. Those that vote against don't count.
Now, we've been talking a bit about what would happen if a deal is brought back next week, but of course there is still a big chance that no deal is agreed. And according to the Benn Act, if there isn't a deal agreed by next weekend, then Boris Johnson must request an extension to Brexit. If he doesn't, When will you hold a vote of confidence?
He is under a legal obligation, if no deal has been agreed by Parliament, to write the letter, send the letter that's been passed by the EU number 2, as you call it, the Ben Act. If he doesn't do that, he's then in breach of the law.
So what would you do then?
We'd obviously take parliamentary action against him at that point.
And is that a vote of confidence?
Either by legislation or a vote of confidence.
And if, of course, he loses a confidence vote, then there'll be 2 weeks for someone else to come forward, become Prime Minister, request that extension. Now, I know that you, as Leader of the Opposition, clearly feel that that should be you.
Of course. I'm the Leader of the Opposition. The whole precedent, all the British parliamentary precedents going back as long as you care to look, are that the first option is that the Leader of the Opposition be invited to form an administration in order to deal with specific points being to make sure we get a deal with the European Union.
But if you can't get the numbers, and I know you want to and you think you should, but if you can't get the numbers, could you consider backing someone else if it is the way to stop a no-deal exit?
I'm not going into hypotheticals. We will form an administration if this government collapses with the purpose of a deal and take this country forward to decide its own future through an election, and the people get a chance to decide their future through a referendum. After all, a referendum made its decision in 2016. This would be a decision time between remain and hopefully some reforms, or leave under the terms that I've outlined.
Because if you won't even consider the thought of someone else leading a temporary government, then some of our viewers may conclude that actually you prioritise getting to number 10 over stopping a no-deal Brexit.
My priority is that our Parliament should decide what the future should be in the immediate sense. All the precedents are the Leader of the Opposition is invited to form an administration. I've been holding meetings with all of the opposition parties regularly in my office. We are agreed on stopping a no-deal exit from the European Union, and as a result of that, significant progress has been made in Parliament, such as the passage of the Ben Act. Is there agreement on other things? Obviously not. We're opposition parties that don't agree on a whole range of political issues, but I think I've shown that the Labour Party is more than prepared to work with others in the interest of protecting this country from the dangers of a no-deal exit.
But it sounds a bit like, the meatloaf approach to Brexit. You'll do anything to stop a no-deal. Apart from that, that's one thing you just won't contemplate.
I will do everything to stop a no-deal exit, including offering us to be an interim, obviously minority administration with the specific point of reaching an agreement and taking the country forward to give the people a choice.
So if you were in that position, can you guarantee that you would only request an extension and then call an election? You would not implement a single piece of Labour Party policy?
Well, we wouldn't have a majority to get any legislation through anyway, so that is not an option. We are not a majority party in Parliament. Obviously, I wish we were. Our purpose would be...
But could you try?
Well, I don't think there'd be much point, because we don't have a majority to get things through. Obviously, immediate issues that come up whilst that government is in office, albeit for probably a very short time, would have to be dealt with. Things happen around the world, things happen around the country. Governments have to act.
So you can't rule out then implementing policy, can you?
You can't. You can never say never about that, but the point of the government would be a short-term government in order to take things forward.
Okay. Now, we know, of course, that Labour want to see a referendum on Brexit. So in that referendum, would you campaign to leave or remain?
What we'd hold is a special Labour Party conference when we've reached the agreement with the European Union, and that party conference would decide what we would do. The point of it is we would have an option of remaining, and I would personally hope reforming within the European Union, as I said in the last referendum campaign, or leaving on these terms, which are trade, which are regulations, and crucially protecting the Good Friday Agreement.
Because can you not see people's exasperation, I guess, that you can't really say how you would campaign in a referendum?
We're the party that tries to bring people together. We have people who are Labour voters who both voted leave and remain. And obviously they have different opinions on that. But they have the same opinions on ending universal credit, on the green industrial revolution, on investment, on the poverty of seaside towns such as we're in at the present time. That's what brings people together. We give people that choice.
But Brexit is arguably the biggest political decision since, the end of World War II.
So and
people are looking to you for leadership, and they will feel, some of them, that you're sitting on the fence.
No, we're bringing it down. I'm giving people a choice between remaining or leaving with these terms. At the moment, the only thing on offer seems to be Boris Johnson taking us over a cliff.
Let's move on from Brexit.